all that. So we would want to reverse those kind of commitments. And if Taiwan is attacked, the American Congress should deal with that. It shouldn't be, what are you going to do about Taiwan? I shouldn't even be asked that. It should be, what do the American people want? Does the Congress, speaking for the American people, want to declare war and drop nuclear weapons on China? You know, something like that. I mean, it should be explicit. I do not think that we have those obligations, and we should bring ourselves back and extricate ourselves from those kind of commitments.
Okay. Next question.
Hi, Dr. Paul. I was really excited to become a citizen last year because I really believe in the principles that this country was founded on. And it's really sad to see those principles flattered by a president who thinks his role is to spy on us and wage unprovoked war against, sovereign nations. So it was really refreshing to kind of discover you in the first Republican debate. Finally, a candidate talking about the Constitution and about the importance of individual liberty. And, when John McCain and Hillary Clinton were standing up, ready to stamp their approval on the Patriot Act, you were one of the few people in Congress who said, no, absolutely not, unequivocally, no, that's wrong. And that really impressed me. So I decided to fly down from our office in Seattle to hear you talk today and to write you a check. And if it wasn't... I
think... So this may be an example of the market at work, but do you have a question? Do you have a question?
I do, but if, if it wasn't for Uncle Sam telling me how I can spend my money, it would be a blank check. But the question, it was not really a question, I just want to ask you to come up to Seattle. You have a tremendous amount of support up in the Evergreen State, and you would receive a reception that you won't forget, and I promise you that. So please come up and speak to us up there. There's a lot of people who are really excited to see you.
Well, if we don't get there, you know who to call? It's my campaign manager, because he's from Seattle, and if he doesn't get me there, it's his fault.
Thanks for coming.
Let's keep on going. Next question.
Hi, Congressman. Thank you for coming today. I wanted to ask you a question about pharmacists in rural communities. Can you
a little louder, just a little louder, please. Yeah, if we could turn the volume up too, whoever's on.
Okay. All right. My question is about pharmacists in rural communities. Do you believe
pharmacists in rural communities? Okay.
Do you believe that pharmacists should be allowed to deny a valid prescription from a doctor based on their religious beliefs? And if so, do you then agree that this would limit the freedoms of women to make choices about their reproductive rights if they don't have the financial ability to travel?
Right. You compound it, and I think on purpose, and I'm saying this in a negative way, by making it rural because there's less options. But the principles have to remain the same, whether it's rural or city. And that is that the contract is between the employer and the employee. That if you're the pharmacist and you go and you're being hired, you have to have an understanding. And you might say, I refuse to prescribe birth control pills or whatever. And you have to come to a resolution between the two of you. It's the contract between you and your employer that makes the difference. Government shouldn't be involved in that.
But government probably shouldn't be involved in restricting the availability of pharmaceuticals. You must be opposed to all of that. Marijuana, all that. Why should government restrict any of that stuff?
Well, I'm not for that.
Right, not for the restrictions.
Right.
Exactly. So in your scenario, really what I think the congressman is saying is
the government.
There shouldn't be any pharmacist. It should be free. The medicine should be freely available. Well, there's not going to be many pharmacists. No,
not exactly. What I want to emphasize is that this solution comes from a voluntary arrangement between the employer and the employee.
Right, but you also said
the government.
But you also said the government shouldn't be in the business of restricting products.
That isn't the government.
No, but the governments restrict. The reasons we have pharmacists is that governments restrict.
Oh, okay, yeah, that's a good point, because I've stated the position that I want a lot more medical care available without licensure. Whether it's doctors or pharmacies or whatnot, because there might be somebody across the street that might not be a licensed pharmacist. You're very good on this stuff.
I'm listening to you. I'm listening.
So yes, the neighbor could could be allowed to dispense a medication like this and solve the problem in the market, rather than some federal bureaucrat coming from Washington and dictating what the pharmacist should or should not do.
Okay, thank you.
Next question.
Hi, Dr. Paul. You mentioned eliminating
A little louder, could you?
You mentioned eliminating the Department of Education. Now, something that I really believe in is that everybody deserves a fair shot. And I think that if you eliminate public education, that really you eliminate the chance of children of poor people to get ahead in this world. That if you go to private education, then the children of rich people would get education, would get ahead, and you would just get a huge classification of people.
Well, I did not say I'd get rid of public education. I went through 12 years of public education. All my kids were educated in public schools. But what I did talk about was I didn't want the federal government to take over public education because they're totally inefficient, they're wasteful, and it costs too much money, and cost goes up, and they come up with these schemes like No Child Left Behind, and teachers don't like it, and it ruins the education. So the more federal government you get involved, the more you're ruining the education for a lot of these kids. And we are undermining the quality of our education. The federal government's responsibility is keep hands off. Only the states can deal with that, but we wouldn't undermine public education. But quite frankly, if you had a truly wealthy, prosperous, free society, education would be available. But there would be always people that needed it. In a local community, if they wanted to provide it, they would be allowed to. And you would not, there's no attack on public education.
But why do you feel that the states would do better? What's to stop, for example, a very rich state to say, okay, we're comfortable with private education, and then children born there would suffer, as opposed to another state?
Because this principle of working toward equality at a national level with national mandates is a form of socialism, and it doesn't work. It always fails, and it becomes expensive, and the quality goes down. So whether it's education or medicine or whatever, it always gets worse. So we're not putting any we're not prohibiting anybody from doing it. But you're right, there will be some inequalities, but that exists entirely. So you can't have perfect equality, just like you can't have individuals acting exactly the same way with their moral standards. In a free society, you are tolerant, but there you will have to be tolerant of some of the inequities in a system. But my argument is that you're going to be a lot better off with the inequalities of local government and less government than the inequalities that come from a government that will undermine the entire public school system. That's what we should really fear. And besides, just think of the control. The control, you know, the curriculum control. You know, should you have sex education or shouldn't you have sex education? And that's what they fight about up there. Those are issues that founders would absolutely be astounded with if they thought that's what we were talking about in the U.S. Congress. You know?
Thank you.
So on education, one of the other positions that I actually was, really found remarkable was not only do you, with sort of the consistency of your position, you're opposed to the concept of student loans for universities. I'm curious, how many people in this audience took out student loans to go through university? So it's in case people can't, the videotape, a lot of people, awful lot. And yet you're opposed to it, but also it was something you did not take advantage of and your children did not take advantage of.
So the big question here now, the philosophic question is, do I lose all your votes because I don't support student loans, or do I get your votes because I don't want you to pay Social Security? No, the student loan system.
Or is the decision to vote based on such narrow commercial interest? But that's another.
Now, of course, I find the student loan thing one of the least offensive things, and I don't campaign on that issue. But in a free market, you wouldn't have it. But the moral question is, as well as the constitutional question, I don't have the authority to do that. But the moral question is why should somebody there's always a cost, or the government wouldn't be involved. A lot of people don't pay them back. And so there's always a cost. Managing is a cost. So why should people who don't get to go to college subsidize your education? I mean, it's just not fair. I went to medical school before any of these loans came up, and I went to Duke Medical School, and they were well endowed. And if you came up short, they would loan you money at 1%. And you paid it back, and it was very private, and the monies were available. the country is wealthier without the government, and these problems can be solved. So there's a vacuum out there when government gets involved. So the government fills it up, and if you don't give student loans, you don't care about young people anymore. I mean, that's the whole thing. If you don't care about food stamps, you're not compassionate. You don't care about poor people. But only freedom really has compassion.
A couple more questions, and then we're going to have to, we'll go a little long, but we're going to run out of time. Please.
Hi, thanks for coming to Google. I have a question that's topical to your presentation here. I'm curious about your position on technology issues and ways that the government how government should get out of technology and ways in which the government should encourage more innovation in technology. For example, what do you think of network neutrality, if you have an opinion on that? What do you think of current copyright and patent law? Do you have an opinion about other technology issues?
Yes, I want the least amount of government. Net neutrality, I think, is regulation that would lead to control, and I don't support that. I want to protect the marketplace and the creativity of the marketplace. I want things to be developed somewhat like cell phones have been developed and distributed. Can you imagine if we had turned that over to FEMA to have an organization 20 years ago and said, your job is to make sure everybody in this country, including poor people, have cell phones?
But didn't the FCC sort of regulate the airwaves?
Well, probably more so than they needed to. I think they should have
You
been
don't want
privatized
everyone
and sold.
broadcasting on
Yeah,
Channel
but
2.
they didn't manufacture cell phones, and they didn't drive the price down. They didn't make them available to just about everybody in this country. So I want the government out of it. You know, whether it's energy or technology or whatnot. Politicians and bureaucrats aren't smart enough to make those kind of decisions. Believe me. I know a few of them. So you want the market to make these decisions.
So, for example, the current debate about the use of the 700 megahertz spectrum, you know, what role should government say, we're not going to regulate it,
Well,
we're not going to do anything about it, you're on your own?
No, those are interesting questions. So you could go back to the 1920s and radio frequencies. They should have all been sold. They should have been property rights. I mean, we have other property rights. They were new and different. But the idea of licensure is very anti-free markets because then they intimidate you. You know, the license can be revoked, and then you have fairness doctrines to be concerned about and all these other issues. So no.
So if the government has an asset, its best function is disposing of it.
That is right, and to sell it
Right.
and make it available in the most equitable fashion possible. And I would agree, some of those aren't real easy, especially because an average person like me might not understand all this technology. But the principle, the principle of the marketplace would be define it and then privatize it and have the courts available to make sure these contracts, but give no special benefits to monopolies. When they did these licenses, you know, they gave monopolies out, and that's a big problem. And some of these communication, your telephone communication, they've come about through more power and authority coming from the government. So you really can't have monopolies or cartels without some type of government protection, whether it was the railroads a long time ago or whether it's communications now or our utilities. They do become monopolies, but true monopolies can't occur in a free market. They usually almost always occur with government assistance. And if a company gets very, very big, and they have 99% of the market, and it's truly free, you have to have free entry to the marketplace, but they only can be big because they're satisfying the consumer, and they drive prices down. And if prices go up too high and there's free entry, somebody's going to come along and nip at you. You know, so we want to honor the integrity of the marketplace and freedom, because that's where the creativity is release the creative energy of individuals. You don't have much creative energy under socialism. You didn't have it in the Soviet Union, and it's available in this country. We have a lot of freedom left, but a lot of underpinnings have been eroded, you know, whether